This short tutorial video is to assist you with the interpretation of the estrogen results, presumably for a premenopausal woman whose levels are coming out low. So the way the results are rendered here is the premenopausal range typically is going to put women up into this range between the stars. That's the normal range. And then the postmenopausal range for each of these estrogen metabolites is that little purple band. So if a postmenopausal woman or a woman who's had a hysterectomy finds herself with these levels, that's expected. If a premenopausal woman collecting in, the from days 19 through close to the end of the cycle finds herself in these sorts of ranges, then that definitely represents lower levels of estrogen than you're expecting for that phase of life. So it's a pretty clear deficiency in those sorts of cases. If she's taking birth control pills, that's going to drive those levels down predictably. But if there's no other reason for those levels to be so low, then that's probably worth further exploration as to why that is, and then what you're going to do about it. And then, of course, you're going to go further than that with this test and see what the metabolism of estrogen looks like. So we're looking at the 3 metabolite options: the 2-hydroxylation, the 4-hydroxylation, and the 16-hydroxylation. And particularly important in women like this, if you're considering hormone replacement therapy, as we want to see those hormones, whether produced by the body or taken exogenously, we want to see them favor that 2-hydroxylation. So what we normally get, and you can see that from this pie chart, is about 70% 2-hydroxylation, which again is the favored pathway, and then 10% 4-hydroxylation and 20% 16-hydroxylation. Now, this is just an example set of results here, but in this particular case, what you can see is an overproduction of the 2-hydroxylation. So we're really favoring, in this case, that pathway, and that's typically what you hope to see. If that is lower than expected, then that's something that you might want to think about addressing. Keeping in mind, as people address that, they typically take products that push these estrogens further down that 2-hydroxy pathway, which sometimes can be a good thing to make the metabolism better, but it also will reduce the levels of E1 and E2. So if you already have estrogen deficiency, then you have to think your way through that very carefully. So that's the estrogen levels in a case like this, seemingly very low. Then you want to evaluate phase 1 metabolism to see how that looks, and then also phase 2, which we'll get to in a minute. One of the other reasons why these levels could be low is if the woman has collected in the follicular phase, so day 1, day 2, all the way up to day maybe 7, 8, and 9, at which time the estrogen levels are going to start to take off around ovulation. But the way the ranges work out, if you look for estradiol here, the postmenopausal range is that purple band. The premenopausal range starts right here. It just so happens that the follicular range of estrogen ends up right in between. So right where these results are pointing, that's an expected level for someone in the follicular phase. So if you're in the luteal phase, day 19, day 22, day 23, and you find yourself in these ranges, that's a modest deficiency of estrogen. If you find yourself in those ranges on day 4, that's what you'd expect to see. If you find yourself in those ranges and you're postmenopausal, then that would actually be a relatively high level of estrogen compared to what's expected. So again, we're going to evaluate the estrogen levels, evaluate the metabolism, and go from there. When we've evaluated phase 1, we can also look at methylation, which is part of phase 2. So in these two cases, you've got similar levels of 2-hydroxylated estrogens, and then we're evaluating how well they're methylated. So you can see in these two cases, one of them makes a great deal of the methylated product, which is why then this index is relatively high. So we're just looking at the ratio of the two. On the bottom one, you're making less than half of that amount of the methylated product, and that equates to a low level of methylated product. So if you end up right in the middle of this gauge, you're average for the population. You're an average methylator. If you have deficiency in some of the cofactors that are needed for that, if you have genetic defects that prohibit or stop methylation, then you're going to end up on the lower end of this index typically. So You want to evaluate that for your patient. How does that activity look, and then what you want to potentially do about that given the results. So hopefully that's been helpful. We do have other videos on different scenarios for the estrogens as well as the other hormones, so do be aware of those as well.